Hello and welcome everyone to DRJ's webinar series. I am Bob Arnold, President here at Disaster Recovery Journal. We thank you for joining us today as we bring you something a little different. We're bringing together 5 industry experts to discuss 5 of our biggest risks we're facing today. But first, a quick bit of housekeeping. Everyone's phone has been muted. We ask you to utilize the question panel you'll locate on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll answer as many of these questions as possible at the end of the session. And now back to today's panel discussion addressing 5 of our biggest risks. The team here at DRJ has worked really hard to build an agenda for DRJ Spring that's broad, comprehensive, and allows our attendees to dive deep into areas that are most concerning. And we're excited to present a little taste of what that agenda looks like today. So please join me in welcoming some of our speakers from the DRJ Spring to this webinar, each who is an expert in their field. They have always provided invaluable content and knowledge for our community, and I want to thank them for joining us and sharing their insights today. And I'll now hand it over to my good friend and DRJ board member, James Green, to facilitate and drive today's discussion.
Thanks, Bob. I appreciate that. My name is James Green. I am based in Tampa, Florida, just an hour away from DRJ Spring. I'm the co-founder of the Resilience think tank and also Illuminate Advisory. And I'm very excited to be here today with my colleagues. And I'm very excited about DRJ Spring. I don't know about all of you, but I want to leave the house. I want to go somewhere. I want to meet people. I want to network. You know, I want to eat some Mickey Mouse ice cream bars. I'm looking forward to seeing everyone in 2 months. So today we've got something really exciting. We're going to talk with my 5 colleagues here on the screen, all experts, and we're going to look at some of the biggest risk facing people in our profession today. So everyone's going to give a little preview of what they're going to talk about at DRJ Spring. As Bob said, feel free to ask questions in the question box. Chat with us in the chat box. We'll try to keep up with everything as we can. I'd like to start with everyone introducing themselves, and I'll start with Ray.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ray Holliman. I am currently a consulting IT disaster recovery business continuity administrator for HCA Healthcare, and I'm just excited to be able to share a little bit with you this afternoon about what I'm going to be talking about in Orlando.
Thank you, Ray. I'll go over to Ron, who's so dedicated to our profession that he'll even do a webinar in a car if he has to.
And there you have it, but not to worry, everybody. I do have a Tesla. It's driving for me. I am a cyber and business continuity consultant. I'm also a search and rescue volunteer. And finally, I'm a licensed firearms instructor. I'm based in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I'm certainly looking forward to visiting Walt Disney World and getting on the new, oh, wait a minute, this is a DRJ. Yes, and I'm actually looking forward to the Mickey bars as well. That is top of my list. The fact that it's in Walt Disney World has absolutely nothing to do with it. But while you're at the show, you can have your spouse and your kids and aunts and uncles and fathers and brothers out there. So certainly a time to get out of the house and join us.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ron. Gwen, we'll go to you next.
Hi, I'm Dr. Gwen Wyatt. I'm a professor of information technology and cybersecurity at Xavier University in Cincinnati, and also one of my specialties has been continuity and disaster recovery. Seems that a lot of times, you know, out in the public, when I talk to people, they have no idea until it's too late. And so, you know, it's just one of those things that really needs to be covered, especially when we have students that are going to be graduating and they're very nervous about coming out into the real world. But I tell you what, I am ready to get out of this house. So a little warm sunshine. I've never had a Mickey bar before, so I think that's what I'm going to do when I get there.
Thank you, Gwen. John, I'd like to go to you next, and I would love for you to share with the group what you said before we went live today, when your little calendar information.
Oh, good afternoon, everybody. My name is John Liuzzi. I'm the National Director of Business Continuity for Southern Glazers Wine and Spirits. So chances are, if you drink it, you're absolutely positively happy that I'm sitting here and being business continuity for Southern Glazers, because we distribute, with the largest distributor of wine and spirits throughout the world. So the party usually doesn't get started until we show up. And I just I'm just excited here to tell you about supply chain continuity. It's obviously a topic that's near and dear to my heart, given the fact that we are one of the world's largest importers of product, throughout the world into the United States. And what James is speaking about is the fact that I've been managing the COVID efforts for our organization for 679 straight days. So it's kind of fun to talk about something a little bit different than COVID. So I appreciate it. Look forward to chatting with you guys. So.
Absolutely. Thanks, John. And finally, we'll wrap up with Regina.
Well, thank you. And it's great to be with all of my esteemed colleagues here today. I too look forward to a Mickey bar and going to Orlando. So just by way of introduction, our firm's been in practice, oh my God, 40 years this year. And what we specialize in is primarily three things: crisis management and team design, exercise development. And alas, I am well known for being a pandemic planner. I think the first pandemic speech I gave at DRJ was in 2003. So yeah, I've been doing this a long time. So I look forward to hearing what my colleagues have to say, and I look forward to seeing all of you in Orlando.
So Regina, I don't know if we should thank you for preparing all of us or blame you for making all this come true.
You can kind of probably do a little bit of both.
A bit of both. I love that. Ray, let's start with you. I'd love to hear about what you're presenting about at DRJ Spring and what's on your mind right now.
Yeah, so for DRJ Spring, my topic's kind of on how does disaster recovery plus high availability equal resiliency? I think that a lot of us really think through, we've been thinking as organizations are moving to the cloud, a lot of our leaderships are thinking, okay, we're in the cloud, we're protected. And that's the conversation I continuously have over and over again. Okay, we're in the cloud, we're fine. And it's been interesting to really be able to show these outages that we've seen over the last couple of years of where, yes, you can be in the cloud, but that does not mean that you have resiliency. That does not mean that you're protected from an outage. And so it's really getting people into that mindset of, we have to, even though you no longer have that data in your data center, making sure that you're still following those basic disaster recovery steps. There are ways that you can become more highly available in the cloud. And that's a lot of reasons why organizations are moving that way. They want to be more highly available. They want to have those availability zones. But it's also thinking about taking it one step further. If you have your data in both of those zones and you're replicating to both of them, what happens when you have a cyber event? And now you've corrupted both of your availability zones. You still have to have disaster recovery there, because a conversation I have almost weekly is that, well, we're HA. Yes, you can be HA, but you still need disaster recovery, because that only protects you, that protects your production. But what happens when your production becomes fully corrupted? And so it's really getting people to think through not just about disaster recovery and the ways that we've traditionally thought about it, with backups and replication, and moving towards that overall standpoint of resiliency. I think that's really where we're headed, especially in IT. So how can we as professionals really shift that way and help our organizations shift and give them some education around what do we mean when we say disaster recovery? What do we mean when we say high availability? And what do we mean when we say resiliency? So it's really looking at the definitions of those three things, because they are very similar, but they're not necessarily interchangeable. And that's a lot of what I've been having to fight, is that the definition that one organization has of high availability may be completely different from what another organization says. So in my presentation, I really look at what are the definitions of those terms, looking at those definitions, breaking them down, and then explaining how does disaster recovery play an impact? How does high availability play an impact? And how does that get you to be more resilient? Because we still need backups, we still need replication, we still need all of these foundational items that we've had for years, but we can move to the cloud in a way that makes sense. And so I really like having the conversation and starting everybody on that basic definition level, because organizations are trying to move to the cloud in a very rapid rate. But if you don't have those foundational items there, then you're still not necessarily any more protected that you were on-prem. Really, all you've done is really shift your cost center from one place to another. And so that's what's really been an interesting conversation. And I think that we have to really think about, what do we mean? On-prem is still a great solution for a lot of organizations. The cloud may be a great solution. But then you may have a hybrid approach. So it looks different for everybody, but going back to those definitions can be used at any level, on-prem, the cloud, hybrid. Really, our goal should be resiliency for everyone, but it may look different in what you're looking at based upon your industry. I'm in healthcare, so some of my systems, I need to have them to be HA because we don't want clinicians to see a lot of downtime. Well, there may be other systems that, they have a caching mechanism, so it's okay for them to be down for 24, 48 hours because we can catch back up and then starting to see what happens when it's a vendor hosted solution that's in the cloud and not necessarily something we have control over, because I think we've seen outages like that where you think the vendor has all of their BC and DR in place, but they may not. And I think we've seen that over the last few months as well, of people thinking that the vendors are being fully protected, but then they may have some type of event and then you're having to put into your business continuity and disaster recovery plans. So it's really about getting those definitions so that way we can have conversations and you can take those back to your organizations to kind of level set, especially when you may be talking to a vendor that has one definition, but your organization says something different. So it's really about trying to level set those kinds of information so that way you can have a more coherent conversation instead of getting lost in the gaps.
That's interesting, Ray. We've got our first question here. Someone asked, what role do you see the cloud playing in resiliency? And it's been interesting the last couple of years. At first everyone wanted everything on-prem and the cloud was scary. And then everyone wanted everything in the cloud. And then everyone realized the cloud was just other people's servers. And, it's not an easy button. So when you look at high availability and you look at resilience, what role do you see? Where is the cloud most effective?
I think the cloud can be very effective for organizations that understand it may not be cheaper. It may be more expensive to be in the cloud, but you don't have to necessarily take care of all of the infrastructure costs and the infrastructure upgrades, and you have the capabilities to have your data more spread out. So that way, if you have a regional outage, you can have your data come back up. You may see some latency and some slowness, but that's better than being completely down for an extended period of time and not being able to come back up. So I think the cloud does play a big role in resiliency, but it goes back to how is it architected and how are you using your cloud investment the best way that you can. The cloud can be a great tool, but the cloud can also hurt you if you're not fully thinking through that you have to take care of it the same way you were having to take care of things that you had on-prem. And I think the biggest thing is understanding cloud may not be cheaper, but it may give you more resiliency. So it's whatever goal you're trying to meet with the cloud. You have to really go back to your basic assumption with that.
Excellent. Thank you. Ron, let's shift over to you, Ron. What's on your mind these days?
Well, even though not everybody is back to work, there are a lot of people back to work. So, for example, businesses such as banks, manufacturing, hospitals, I don't know, liquor distribution companies. John, are your folks back to work? I'm guessing they are. I'm still getting alcohol for my hands, of course, for my hands. But while not everybody is back to work, there are plenty of companies that are back to work. But even if you are not back to work, active shooter response still has some meaning for you. For example, we've seen people walking on the street who have been attacked. We've seen attacks on public transit. The former chief of police of the city of Oakland was actually carjacked at a gas station and shot. We've seen attacks in shopping centers. In the San Francisco Bay Area, people have been shot, believe it or not, just driving on the freeway. Just somebody pulls out a gun and shoots at a car next to them. It's just very, very sad. And, we're just seeing these random acts of violence. Some people are saying because we've been cooped up so long that we're just getting out our aggressions any way we can. And just May of this year, there were multiple deaths at the Valley Transportation Authority in Santa Clara. And that facility, there were 9 dead, and that facility is right next door to the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office. Now, what this does mean is that law enforcement will respond. Absolutely no doubt of that law enforcement will respond. But until law enforcement does respond, it is up to you and your coworkers or whoever you are with to be able to assess and address the situation. And really, this is what my session is going to be about. For example, in the case of the YouTube shooting, which I'll be going into in detail, VTA is still under investigation. There's not a lot of information about it, the Valley Transit Authority, but YouTube is reasonably closed now, so we can talk about it. And I do have information that I can present in person, but cannot present online. So even if you've seen my past online presentations, I'll be showing videos, doing some in-person exercises, and giving away some handouts that I just could not do online due to law enforcement restrictions. But there were acts of personal heroism. People's lives were saved because somebody knew how to stop them from bleeding. So a number of people were bleeding, and without stopping the bleeding, they would have bled out. And there is nothing more heartbreaking than sitting there and watching somebody in front of you bleed out because you don't know how to stop the bleed. And we're going to discuss that as well. I'd just like to ask one question, one quick question of the radio audience here. So if you are not a law enforcement officer and you hear gunshots, do you A, run or walk towards them, B, run or walk away from them, or C, freeze in place because you have no idea whatsoever what to do? Unfortunately, the correct answer, often going back and looking, the correct answer has been C, freeze in place because you don't know what to do. And this is why it makes it so important that you do know what to do. And by the way, the correct answer is you probably want to walk or run away from the gunshots. Alrighty, back to you.
That's some good advice, Ron. And now you are also, correct me if I'm wrong, are you doing a pre-conference session at DRJ as well? Did I see that, or am I thinking of someone else?
I believe I've got a session on Sunday afternoon.
Okay. Excellent.
I don't know if that's considered pre-conference.
Thank you so much. Look, hopefully you won't have to drive all the way to Orlando from California.
No, we're going to fly. Yeah, the better part of discretion, I believe.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Gwen, over to you. What topic, what are you going to be talking about at our conference in March?
Well, my main topic is on education because I'm a professor. But one thing I've noticed is a lot of my students are real nervous when they graduate because cyber and disaster and all that keeps changing. It's never the same. You know, you can watch TV one day and everything's great, and the next day they found something new that has shut down the company, or maybe there's been an attack. And one of the biggest issues that we have in education is keeping up with industry. You know, sometimes education has, I call it a little albatross. You know, they just don't do things as fast. So one of the things I wanted to look at was education in general, and have different organizations from all over contribute and let people know, well, for example, what do you all need? You know, what does an employer need? I know that a lot of times the employers, you all just assume that we're up with it and we know exactly what you need and that's what we're teaching, and that's not true. You know, there's a lot of national organizations there that, you know, provide us guidelines, but some of them are government oriented, so they're a little slow. So the whole idea, what I wanted to do was to, number one, look at the potential incoming employees, because there's, you know, thousands of cyber jobs that are open and there's not enough people. And so because there's not enough people, the people that you do receive need to be on it. I mean, they need to know everything, and they need to actually be, I guess, well, for lack of a better word, they need to be resilient, but they also need to be forward thinking. So one of the things that I wanted to look at was having alongside my seminar, we're going to do some actual brainstorming and picking of the brain of employers and saying, well, what do you need from students? Excuse me, I'm still suffering from a cold. But what do you need from an incoming student. But even with that, you also need to look at your existing employees. You know, do you have a curriculum available that is actually truly followed by internal, in the internal structure? The other thing I want, which I'm working on now, is I'm trying to create a national advisory board. And that national advisory board will be designed to help institutions across the country determine, okay, well, IBM needs this, or maybe your local hospital needs this type of education. But the whole goal is to try to come up with a large group that can maybe within like a month or two respond and say, hey, maybe you need to add this to the curriculum, or maybe you need to take this out because that doesn't happen anymore. And so one of the things is, because cybersecurity changes frequently, a lot of times, like I said, education, whether it's internal education inside your business or external education, it's just hard to keep up. Excuse me. And so, you know, I want to look at how can you be resilient through education.
Yeah, Gwen, I'm really glad that you're part of our panel today and will be presenting at DRJ, because that's something we often hear from organizations. They say, hey, the people coming out of school don't have the skills that I'm looking for. But then you see industry doesn't share with the academic institution, here are the skills I'm looking for. So you kind of create this infinite loop of people aren't trained up to where they need to be, but then they're not getting feedback of where they need to be trained. So I'm very excited that you're with us today and also going to be a part of our conference. John, you live, I think, 2 hours from me. I haven't seen you since pre-pandemic. I have done my best to support your company and its products the last 3 years, I think, much to all of our chagrin. You've probably been a busy man the last couple of years, keeping America calm and sane as we're all locked down. So what are you going to be talking about at DRJ?
Well, what's near and dear to my heart is supply chain continuity. And yes, you are right. I am only a few hours south of you. I am based here in South Florida. So where is it? A beautiful sunny 74 degrees, just so everybody's aware. But anyway, yes, you know, I can successfully report that Southern Glazers has had 2 record years the last 2 years. Even though restaurants closed down and bars and things like that, people somehow found a way to find their spirit. And what was also interesting about finding their spirits was they actually upgraded to better spirits, not just the noble store brands or lower brands. They were actually buying, because they were entertaining at home, more top shelf brands. So kind of an interesting trend that took place in the industry over the last couple of years. But you know, from a supply chain perspective, in my organization, you know, we're one of the largest importers in the United States and shippers throughout the U.S. So this is something that we take very seriously. We have a very, very robust supply chain management program that has multiple disciplines associated with it, which includes demand planning, purchasing, brand management, market intelligence, logistics, compliance, warehouse management, inventory control, capacity planning. All of those things, we have teams that are designated to do those things. What's interesting is that they do business continuity all day long. They just don't know it. They don't call it that. But it's all of those things combined. It's part of our supply chain management team that helps us get through all these different situations that occur throughout the world. And they could be anything. I mean, I've had to respond to or identify a labor strike in out of France and how that would impact, you know, the wine industry associated with, you know, products coming being distributed in the U.S. I mean, it's all, anything that happen anywhere in the world that can anywhere impact our supply chains. And yes, this Suez Canal, where the ship got stuck there a few months ago, that impacted our supply chain. So we had to work around strategies associated with that. There's obviously cyber attacks and breaches that are occurring at different vendors and things like that, different suppliers that we're concerned about, and obviously COVID's impact and skilled labor forces, all those things like that, transportation logistics, those are all part of our program as part of what we do and what we manage. So the things that we do are pretty basic associated with how we ensure that. I mean, we completely very, very mature around mapping out our complete supply chains, understanding from throughout the entire process, all the different touch points associated with all the different vendors that are involved in that. And we also prioritize those. So there's certain ones that will actually put more effort into associated with ensuring continuity than others. And then there's obviously alternative strategies that we develop. We also have a fundamental awareness of the entire supply chain, where all the risks are. So looking at the global picture of the world, looking at, even down to, local situations for us, understanding the fundamental threats to our supply chain. My team, I have a very sophisticated toolbox associated with threat assessment worldwide. And what we'll do is share that information with all of our supply chain teams when we do identify a specific threat. They may identify a particular area or region, route, or something like that. And we also, one of the other things that we do as part of our program, we actually share those threats with our key vendors, our key suppliers. So, shared situational intelligence is a big part of what we do, because we are obviously much more, we have a lot more tools, more capability at our disposal. So we want to make sure that we can extend that to any of our key suppliers, because obviously they're a critical part of our success, is just, so we can service our customers, right? So we make sure we understand what our supplies, our cycles are, our business cycles very well defined, so we can actually anticipate things in advance associated with that, our supply and demand. We make sure that we continually assess our relationships with all of our suppliers, and obviously it starts with good contracts, good service level agreements right up front, making sure we do periodic reviews of those with all of our key suppliers. And the other thing that's really important for us is making sure that everybody at the right levels understands the risks. So throughout the organization, whoever the key executives are, understanding how they're responsible for these relationships, we want to make sure that they're always at all times aware of the risks associated with any particular supplier or particular region or part of the country, something like that. So the other thing we want to make sure is we want to try to keep any supplier impacts to an acceptable limit. So when we develop plans associated with any particular vendor, we make sure that we have, maybe it's not the entire service level, but maybe there's some segment of that service level that we can continue operations through any type of event. So it's really important that we build that into that. And we don't assume, essentially that one size fits all. We understand that there's a unique dynamic nature associated with all different suppliers that make up our portfolio. So we want to make sure that we customize those programs. And actually part of what we do for our program here, for the business continuity program, because some of our suppliers don't have business continuity disciplines within themselves. We actually extend, and I've actually gone to some of our key suppliers and made presentations and met with their executives and kind of give them a framework associated with how they can develop some maturity around business continuity and risk management. And that seems to have been really, really helpful associated with how, at least getting them started and them getting some awareness around how they can help support business continuity, which is obviously a critical part of what we do for our purposes. So. Cool.
Nice. John, we've got a question here. I want to ask it to you now. It's around evaluating supplier continuity. And the reason I'd like you to answer this now, it seems in the last 12 months, everyone is now focused on supply chain and is a supply risk manager and a risk expert. But you were focused on, when I first met you 3, 4, 5 years ago, you were focused on supply chain. So what are some of the things that you're doing to evaluate your supply chain's continuity? And are there things you can share with the audience on that?
Yeah, we were evaluating it even well before toilet paper became a hot commodity, if you remember that a couple of years ago, right? So, but again, that was a supply chain issue, is really what it came down to, right? So it all really starts with, market research when you're doing that initial vendor evaluation, understanding what their potential capabilities are, identifying, making sure that there's a, association with what your expectations associated with how you're going to continue your business, service your customers, making sure that gets built into their strategies. Obviously, doing business impact analysis, is understanding risk profiles, shared situational intelligence, testing and training programs. You want to make sure you have exercises between your different organizations. And a lot of times those exercises, they don't have to be these huge Broadway production shows. They can even be just short tabletop exercises, but at least helps identify, risks associated with like what if scenarios, and it can start building, strategies around this type of thing. So one of the things we do is integrated crisis management with our suppliers. So if there is a situation that we can help support, since we have a very mature incident response capability within our organization, we can obviously help support any type of, with our toolbox associated with being able to try to help any of our suppliers with that. When you're looking at a particular supplier or vendor, don't look for ongoing activity. don't necessarily look for an individual plan and say, okay, they got a plan in place. Look for things that are activity that demonstrate they do have a capability. Do they have, is there an evidence of training and exercise that goes on a regular basis? Do they have a business continuity professional that's managing their program? Has their program been audited? Are they following any of the industry standards? I mean, these are all good questions to make sure that you understand and build in so that you understand that the scope of what their plan is actually supports what your business requirements are.
That's great. And I love that you share those templates and some of that information with your suppliers to help bring their continuity programs up to speed. That's fantastic.
Yeah, because if we don't have their products, guess what? I have nothing to sell. So it's in my best interest to make sure that my suppliers can continue to deliver so I can then service my customers. So.
Exactly. And then I have nothing to buy. So let's Regina, the oracle of pandemic, I think a funny story I've never shared with you, so I'll share it with you now. Back pre-pandemic, back in the glory days when we could travel, I was speaking at a conference in New Zealand, and the strangest question I've ever been asked, I was asked, so I'm going to share it with you now. The person asked me, do you know Regina Phelps? And I said, yes, I do. And that person was very impressed. I don't think it mattered what I said, just the fact that I said I knew who you were. So you have fans around the world, apparently. Tell us about, I imagine you might mention something about pandemic or COVID at DRJ Spring. So what are you going to be sharing with us?
Yes, well, thank you for that. And actually, we do work in 5 continents, so except Antarctica. So, you know, I'm actually, we do get around. So I'll be doing 2 sessions, and I'm just going to briefly describe each one of them. The first one is crisis management in really, really tough times. And it's really going to focus on specifically 3 major areas related to crisis management and the pandemic. Now, we have all been observing leaders, you know, whether it's governmental leaders or whether it's people in corporations or individuals around the world. And we've all observed, you know, gosh, that's a great leadership skill. And the other one, maybe not so much. So what we've done is I've condensed these learnings, if you will, into a presentation. And I'm going to focus really on 3 things in this conversation about crisis management in really, really tough times. The first thing I'm really going to focus on is situational awareness. And I think all of us professionally know that in a crisis, the #1 thing you need is situational awareness. And boy, that has been problematic from the very beginning. And it still is problematic. And a lot of it has to do with misinformation and the incredible rise of social media and how so many people get information and pass it along, which makes you as a leader really having to struggle to know what's really real. So I'll talk about that. The second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about what we call the 5 ground rules of crisis management. So when we're evaluating leaders around the world and people that I coach all day long, one of the things that I try and do is I try and apply this concept of these 5 ground rules. So it's sort of like a, you know, a measuring stick, if you will. How is that person doing, or how can I move them towards being a more successful crisis manager? And what I'll do is I'll talk about those. But one of the ones that I always think about when I talk about these ground rules is that I'm at #1 on my ground rule list for any leader is that they need to take responsibility and lead. And that means they also then have to make decisions. And as I think all of us know from working with leaders and corporations, what I certainly see in all over the world is that people don't like to make decisions unless they have a lot of information. And of course, during the pandemic, we've had to make decisions with often not much. And so leaders have to take responsibilities and they have to lead. And if it's the wrong decision, make another one. And then the last thing I'll talk about in my general session speech is really what the 5 key traits are that have been the most successful of leaders around the world in the pandemic. And they're probably a little different than you actually might think. And so I'll share those with you, and I'll give you a variety of examples as well. And I think you mentioned, James, at the beginning of this, you know, we're still in this, and it's going to change and evolve. but this is going to be with us for a while. So I think we're just going to have to keep going to John's place to find some way to sustain ourselves over the next, I don't know. When I started talking with my clients, and by the way, the first communication I sent out to my clients was January 2nd, 2020, that said, remember that pandemic plan we wrote you, 7,000 years ago? You might want to get it out because there's a really weird respiratory illness spreading in Wuhan, China. So my clients thought I was crazy, and then I became brilliant about a month later. The other thing I'm going to talk about is the other big catastrophic issue that I've been working with my clients with for about 7 years, and those are cyber attacks. Now, I am not a cyber professional like Gwen or Ray, but what I am is a crisis manager. And what I do is I design for large companies about 100 big exercises a year. I have perfected, by the way, the virtual exercise, which I never thought I would ever in my life do. But I'll be talking about cyber exercises. Now, I've personally sat in some of my clients' exercises where they've had like maybe another vendor or an insurance company do it. And there are so many things that you could actually do in an exercise that would be so powerful. And what I chronically find is that people just don't know how to design them in a way that delivers. And what I will say to you is that in our client population, we've had some of my biggest global clients that had some of the biggest catastrophic cyber events. And the other thing I would just say to you is that when you think about a cyber exercise, what you want to do is there's about 5 key things that you have to nail to really get them to understand how bad it could be. But one of my best tools I will tell you is that when you do an exercise, you want to leave them crying at the end. Now that may sound kind of goofy, but I've actually sat through exercises where people have, advanced the clock pretty quickly. They go from day 1 to day 3 to day, 7, and then 2 months later they've recovered. And the people go through that exercise and they think, well, it was awful, but it wasn't that bad. Oh, no. In my exercises, they're crying when they leave because my clients who have had catastrophic failures, it doesn't get better in a day or 2 or 5 or 14. It's often a month. So I want them to understand this is bad, bad, bad. And when they pick up those business continuity plans, there had better be a brand new section that says, in a sustained technology outage, break the glass, do this, because no one has that. And so you are doing a disservice to your participants to not make them cry at the end. So other than that, that's all I'm going to be talking about.
See, that's very interesting because I was always taught that a happy client is a repeat client, but now I have to go to your session and see how to make my clients cry. And I think it's important that you talk about ransomware because a lot of people don't see ransomware or cyber attack as a crisis, but it completely is. And Ray, we've got a question in here for you, so I'll flip back to Ray. Maybe the person's asking, how has ransomware changed resiliency patterns? What have you seen in the landscape the last year or so?
Yeah, really what I'm seeing is that people are now thinking about, there was this big push to get rid of tape in environments. That's coming back. And so you're seeing a lot of people go back to physical tape because that's something that is immutable. It is not on your network. That is something that you can have in your back pocket to restore your systems. And it's sometimes a cheaper option than doing like an air gap type solution that, still may have, it may have the corruption in there because sometimes they sit and wait for 6 months before they deploy. And so it's really going back. That's kind of what I'm really seeing is like, going back to the ways that we thought we were going to move away from, they're coming back. And so you're starting to see that you're seeing multiple levels. So you're seeing tape and you're seeing replication and you're seeing air gap. You're seeing people trying to spread out their backups in as many ways as possible so that they can be prepared for a cyber attack, because nobody wants to be someone that says, it's going to take 2 or 3 weeks for us to get back up. People are wanting to be back up in hours. And so this is a way to really have that. It may be extended outside of your normal RTO, because your normal RTO is always for best case scenario that, you may have a natural disaster and, you just need to swap operations. But it's really taking that step forward with cyber and seeing, okay, cyber, for a natural disaster type event, we may have an RTO of 4 hours. For a ransomware, it may need to extend out to 8 or 12 just because of the technology that you have there. But that's really what I'm seeing, is that people are bringing back some of those technologies so that they have the options, especially with ransomware becoming so prevalent.
That's interesting. So after our webinar today, I think I'll be on eBay buying some tape libraries and selling them at a markup.
Exactly.
John, we have a lot of questions for you. I'll try to whittle some of these down. But there's a good question here. Susan Davis asked, how deep into the supply chain can you look? Because I know a lot of companies struggle with their suppliers, but then those suppliers have vendors and those vendors have tertiary suppliers. Are we at an agave farm looking at the plants? Like, how far deep is it realistic to go?
I guess it depends upon, that's your interdependency to determine what's the impact of that particular vendor. I mean, that's really what you obviously want to spend most of your time and your focus on, those that are most critical as part of your supply chain. So the depth of what that is really depends upon how critical that is for your continuity of operation and your ability to service your customers. So it's not one size fits all, right? So you have to customize that based on the criticality of that vendor and to your business. So
that's interesting. Ron, we've got a few questions here around workplace violence, and I think there's been a misconception maybe the last few years that workplace violence has gone away. And part of that is maybe just a myopic view of people who've been able to work from home or work remote. So what are you seeing out there? You mentioned a few things, but how are you educating some of those companies that have hybrid workforces or that are deemed essential or are service personnel that, maybe statistically the question is around, are we seeing a trend down, or is it just kind of a dip as we've, quarantined and hidden out for the last few years?
I don't believe that we're seeing a dip down. I think what we're actually seeing is that violence outside the workplace has increased substantially. Okay. I mean, very substantially, so that violence in the workplace is now sort of becoming, I don't want to use the term, but kind of part of the noise level, that violence is increasing all the way around, unfortunately. I can tell you that, for example, at my wife's workplace, they used to have a armored car service that would take checks from her area to the bank. But because the number of folks coming in is so low now, they don't have as many checks as they used to. And they asked my wife to go make a bank run every day. Now, my wife she's Asian. She's not, a spring chicken. She's my age, roughly. And she is what we would call a target in the San Francisco area. And, she told her management she really didn't want to be doing that because she felt that she was a target. And I actually had to go back through some of my customer stories and some of my research and put together a document that we could give to them saying this is not the best idea in the world to be having an older Asian woman in San Francisco going through an area that is not the best area with a cash and check deposit to a bank. So it's still there, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think we're certainly all seeing violence in areas where we haven't seen it before. A lot of frustration around mask mandates or vaccination mandates that are, that frustration is being focused maybe in the wrong area. We've seen a lot of disturbances, it feels, over the holidays at airports, on airplanes, people upset that they have to wear masks at different shops. And I think it's a tough situation right now for the people who work in those industries. They're just trying to do their best to follow government mandates, jurisdictional mandates, and they kind of get the brunt of a lot of people's anger. So
there's also mental health issues too. The mental health issues across the United States are really, really grim. With, I think the CDC's latest research said about 45% of Americans are experiencing some sort of mental health disturbances. So, you know, we don't need that on top of what we already have. So I think that doesn't help Ron and his violence-related concerns.
And indeed, something, you know, that James said, and Regina as well, if you do go to a bank or a restaurant or whatever, please, you know, exude kindness. You know, it is not their fault you have to wear a mask. It is not their fault they don't have the change that you want. It is not their fault that they're out of the items that you want to order, well, except for alcohol. Thank you, John. And you know, you really don't want to be going off on service people. And unfortunately, that is happening a lot. And, you know, we do have to be very, very careful and just take that extra breath.
Mm-hmm.
And be thankful that there are people even working today.
Right.
Absolutely. So Gwen, I have a question here around industry and academia. So what are some ways that people in industry, risk professionals like all of us on this webinar can help academic institutions?
Well, one of the things most institutions have is an advisory board. And they might not meet, maybe they meet like once or twice a year, maybe 3 times, depending on, you know, what's important with the school. But you can always check with any local institution, especially community colleges. You know, the best thing that you can do is just try to be on one of those boards, because a lot of times, like our school, we have a board that meets twice a year. And we ask them, what is it that is needed? And so it, you know, it's usually unpaid, but it's that ability to be able to contribute and make sure that students, when they graduate, that they're actually going to be ready for the workforce, for cybersecurity, even disaster recovery. But that's joining an actual advisory board is one of the best ways.
That's interesting. I didn't know about that. So I certainly encourage everyone to do that. I encourage everyone here to guest lecture at your local colleges and universities. I try to do that 2 or 3 times a year. It's the scariest thing I do in my career, to stand in front of 18 and 19 and 20-year-olds, because you will get immediate feedback. There is no filter there. If they don't like what you're saying or not interested, everyone's phones will be out and they will tune you out immediately. I love it. But it is one of the scariest things I do. So certainly encourage everyone to, you know, reach out to your local institutions, work with your local institutions. Regina, we have a nice softball question for you. So I'll tee you up. How do we get leaders to make decisions with incomplete information?
Boy, isn't that a softball question? Thank you for that.
I just thought I'd throw a nice easy one here.
You know, I think part of it is actually practice. I think that that's one of the advantages, again, of a well-designed exercise, is that people have the opportunity to experiment with making decisions and having them be wrong. Now, certainly leaders right now in the last 2 years have probably had more opportunities to make bad decisions than they ever have, and have executed on those. But I think what you want to do is you want to create a situation where you actually can create an experience. People can make some really stupid mistakes, and then they can correct them in real time. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing I would say is it's really great if there's an opportunity for that leader to either be able to have some sort of connection, either with a coach or somebody that can really help them really work through those issues of not being willing or able to make a decision. So that would be the second thing. And the third thing I would say to them is really to think about the types of events that would happen in their industry. And then think about the social media component. Because what happens in a lot of situations that especially become public is that the social media teams all over are talking about this. And so people are going to be talking about you whether you're saying something or not. And I think social media is another way that you can basically say to people, look, you know, if a bomb goes off, an active shooter happens, if we can't get vodka in the store, whatever, they're going to be talking about us. And so we had better make a decision. And so I think creating those situations and environments, and also giving them some emotional support to stick it out there, is really what I found to be the most successful. So those 3 things.
I think that's so important. Yeah, go ahead.
those are exactly, so I'm the incident commander for our organization, right? So I've sat through a number of Regina's presentations and learned so much from her. But one of the things that she taught me was, hey, John, you got to make decisions and keep it moving. May not be the right decision, but at least, because you know what's going to happen, something else is going to come behind it that now you're going to make another decision on. So it starts to pile up on you when you're in these situations. So you want to be able to keep the information flow going. You can correct those decisions and move along, but it's really important to address them and continue to move forward with the information that you have.
And
I think
also,
one of the worst things.
building on what John said, also, I would say is that the idea is that you always have to be thinking about how you frame it, right? Because you're making the decision on what you know now. And so what you have to do is that when you're communicating that, you want to be able to frame that on what we know now. This is what we're doing, because as we know in the pandemic, it changes a lot, right? Right.
Yeah. That's
That
just
kind
like
of goes back.
students.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. I was gonna say, that's just like my students. They one of their final exams is a simulation of a cyber attack.
Oh, cool.
And they have to respond on that real-time information. And then they criticize each other or not criticize, I'm sorry, they critique each other at the end of that session. And it's just really interesting just looking at that reactivity. And, that's one of the things that I've found is that's also what I want to be able to teach, is getting them ready for that type of reactivity, because everything does change.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean,
And one of the worst things you can do is, no comment, right? You don't want to get out there and say no comment. That is horrific to do that. One reason why you want to be putting your messaging together a long time before the incident happens. And Regina's practices go through that kind of thing. Is what is your messaging going to look like? What messaging works? What messaging doesn't work? But have packaged messages ready to run and be able to branch and make decisions. But certainly don't freeze, and certainly don't say no comment.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. All right, everyone, we're just about at time. I want to thank all of you for joining us today, especially our experts. All 5 of our experts here will be expanding on these topics at DRJ Spring, March 20 to 23rd, live in Orlando. So we're coming up 2 months out. We're going to have an exciting and jam-packed 4 days of networking, training. John's bringing his best French hand sanitizer, Mickey Mouse bars, vendor meetings, and demos. And I've actually got some breaking news. Bob Arnold's letting me break this live right here. There's going to be an online on-demand option for DRJ Spring, which will give you access to the live streamed keynotes and some of the on-demand sessions for 6 months. Early registration pricing ends next week on the 21st. So check that out. More information at drj.com. I will see all of you there. Again, thank you to our experts for joining us today. Thank you for our several hundred attendees. And I will turn it back to Bob to close us out.
All right, wonderful. Thanks, James. And first, I would like to personally thank all 6 of these professionals sharing their insights with us and spending an hour with us all today. So I truly do appreciate your time. And we do hope to see everyone in Orlando. We're looking forward to our return to in person, certainly doing it as safely as we possibly can. And yes, you can expect the same great content and knowledge such as what you've experienced today, but you'll also be able to take advantage of the networking, the hospitalities, and fun you've come to expect from DRJ events. It will be a great time to reconnect with some colleagues and maybe make some new connections. If you have any questions about the event, please don't hesitate to reach out to the DRJ team. We're here to answer any question you might have and help you plan your time accordingly at the conference. And we do hope to see everyone live there in Orlando in March. So if you have any additional questions, please contact Disaster Recovery Journal. Thank you again. This now ends today's webinar. Thanks, everyone.